Welcome to ACX University. I'm Scott Jacoby, and today's topic is project prospecting, the act of going beyond the projects that are listed for audition on ACX, finding good books that are not yet in audio, and getting your foot in the door early with the author or publisher and getting them through the audiobook production process. To help us understand the ins and outs of this process are Neil Hellegers and Stephen J. Cohen.
Hello.
Neil is an actor and narrator who lives in Brooklyn, New York. With a background in performing and teaching Shakespeare nationally and internationally, he has also appeared in various commercials, TV programs, and films. As a narrator, he has produced independently for ACX, as well as read for Audible Studios, Tantor Audio, Blackstone Audio, Harper Audio, and shortly, Penguin Random House. He is a proud member of Actors Equity and SAG-AFTRA. Welcome, Neil.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Stephen has been telling stories his whole life, professionally since 1991. In addition to the audiobooks he has worked on through ACX, Stephen has recorded for Audible Studios, Tantor Audio, HarperCollins, and also, soon, Penguin Random House. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi. Good to see you.
Good to have you here.
Okay.
Nice to have two people who will very shortly be working for Penguin Random House.
Everyone should, really.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, today we're here to talk about the act, the art of being proactive, finding projects that haven't yet made their way to ACX, and reaching out to the authors or publishers, telling them about ACX, offering your services to them, and getting them on ACX to get the book produced and distributed. So my first question I'd like to start off with is, what has your experience been on ACX, and how did you come to realize that there was benefit in going upstream to find books to produce? Why is this a good idea?
So, I mean, a lot of authors find their way to ACX, and with a lot of narrators also going for the same projects, it kind of makes sense to do what you were just saying, to go upstream, to kind of work back and see the kinds of projects that may not have made it to ACX yet. The same kind of evaluation that you do in, when you're looking at a book that's already published, there's the same sort of a thing that you would wind up doing to assess whether any book in general, even if it's not already there on ACX. So it just sort of made sense to go to a place where the amount of competition might be a bit less.
Mm-hmm. Right. And how many times roughly have you done this?
Oh, boy.
Even if it's just a ballpark, it doesn't have to be an exact number.
Well, how many times? That's the thing. Someone's successful. It's a panning for gold sort of a metaphor. Mm-hmm. It's the idea of I do it on and off regularly. I think maybe about 11 of the titles I've done for ACX come from me pulling people into the system.
Okay, that's cool. And yeah, that's what I was what I was alluding to, is how many times have you done it successfully?
Right.
And how about you, Neil? What's your experience been, and how often are you doing this, and why does it work for you?
Well, I think it really actualizes what, we're on ACX, we're called producers. We're not called narrators. And so if it's I think perfectly good and fine to go about it in the way that you are looking to see what is up there for auditioning and go for it. For me, it sort of evolved naturally out of doing just that. My first 3 books were on ACX, and it was a great way of working and figuring out the system and figuring out my work as well. And then eventually, the authors, particularly ones that happen to come to ACX, are independently minded, and they're plugged in with each other. So initially, it was just one author who I'd done a series for, being public with the work that I had done, and other authors who are connected to him through the same kind of organization, social media, that we're all connected, being interested in me reaching out to them and kind of capitalizing on that interest, and then developing things from there. I think it becomes a great way to, like I said, sort of make the most out of what ACX has to offer, as not just a platform, but as an environment to develop your brand, to really seek out the kind of books that you want to do, but also to kind of grow yourself on a network level and on a business level at the same time as you might be, like you mentioned that Steve and I are doing, working for other publishers. It really expands the scope of what's possible to do, and if it's done correctly, it can be really satisfying too, to create these relationships and find this book that is a really great book and really get to just do it, rather than in a way sort of letting it come to you. It's active rather than passive in that way. And
getting to do it, perhaps finding it before somebody else can get their foot in the door and create more competition.
Yeah, like Stephen was saying, like when you're just auditioning for something that's up there, you're throwing your hat in with I don't know, I guess thousands of people really. And that decision is much harder for that person to make. If
Right.
you're the one who's there for that person, then it's a much cleaner process for sure.
Yeah, actually, the first time I did it was purely accidental.
Oh yeah.
A friend of mine on an unrelated piece of social media was having a conversation in a thread, and he basically tagged me on this other platform to come into the conversation because he knew it was a topic that I knew some stuff about, not realizing that one of the people in the conversation was an author. And so it just sort of became this organic conversation on social media where eventually the person said, I just wrote a book that's like that, and I was thinking about audiobooks.
Oh, okay.
So there I was.
He came to you.
Well, but it wasn't that he came to me asking, can you do this?
Right,
As much
right.
as it was like, I already have the ebook out there. I'm not really sure what the next step is. And so I put my link for my ACX profile in, and he wanted to communicate sort of off thread, but other people were interested. So we
Right.
sort of kept it there in the thread.
Right.
And we talked the whole thing out back and forth. I helped him set up his profile on ACX. And then I actually said, so now you're going to post this for audition. I'd love to do the book, but I think you should post it for audition and see what happens. And so it wasn't actually me actively going out and prospecting as much as it was I was interacting on this sci-fi dystopian thread,
Right.
Like you do.
and an author showed up.
Right.
And so I'm like, here, let me help you get this next step done. And so I've done all of his books on ACX, except for the one book that needed a woman to narrate it.
Right.
And I helped him find her as a narrator.
So you've really established that relationship. And
Exactly.
Now you've used it to expand your network.
Exactly.
So just to give a little bit of idea of the time frame of your careers on ACX and how the prospecting aspect fits into it, could you briefly tell me, like, when did you start on ACX and roughly how many projects have you done, Neil?
It was November of 2013. It was a really great zombie book. And since then, I've done about, I would say, 15, not including the series I'm working on right now, which amidst project. So yeah, about 15 to 16 books.
Cool. Great. And you, Stephen?
About 2 months after Neil, actually, January of 2014. And it's about 20 books so far just through ACX.
Cool.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I ask in part because I know that you mentioned that the first time this sort of happened to you was a little bit of happenstance or luck, but I'm curious, at what point might a producer be ready to try to go beyond what ACX offers in the audition phase and find authors off the site? Is there anything you think you really should have down cold before you sort of take that next step?
Well, there's a couple ways to go about this. I mean, one way is if you're lucky enough to be able to do this in person. So if you have an author's conference, that kind of a thing that happens anywhere near you, where you can simply show up and be the one person in the room who's not writing a book, but somebody who's there as the sort of resident expert, even unofficially, just showing up, hi, I produce audiobooks. That's different because when you can do something like that in person, what you get is they get to shake your hand, they get to talk to you and figure out who you are. If you're doing this completely virtually online, then your social media presence becomes key because if someone's going to start to take you seriously in a conversation, they are going to Google you. They are going to look you up. And so it's better that, it would be good to sort of get a good sense of who you are from an outsider's point of view by Googling yourself and get an understanding of what kind of information comes up to see if you're going to have that conversation with a mystery writer. Are the kinds of things that come up, do they kind of evoke that?
Right. So it sounds like you're saying have a good handle on what your brand is and
Absolutely.
what your online presence looks like and know who you are before you start approaching other people.
Absolutely, because again, it's that ability to do the same thing that somebody is going to do with you if they do it live. Live, they are going to talk to you and get a sense of do they feel like they can work with you. Without having that ability when someone is online, it really does become important for them to be able to look up enough information that they can at least generate that kind of comfort on their own.
Right. Neil, any thoughts?
I mean, yeah, all of that. I mean, and the only thing I would add to that is I feel a lot of this comes out of what one's own interests are. If you like reading sci-fi, which I do, it's most of what I read, I'll naturally be looking to see, has this book been done? And if it hasn't been done, try to start to figure out the channels in which that can happen. Sometimes the author isn't around anymore, and so it becomes a matter of chasing down the literary rights, which is something that I've done as well, aside from live authors as well.
Right.
And then from there, if you have a brand that doesn't fit that, it's going to be a harder sell. Not impossible, but a harder sell. And knowing what you do well and knowing what they might be looking for and creating that relationship is, there's 1,000 different ways that can happen.
Right.
I've seen it happen by it being a cold email, and that's enough to start that relationship. Sometimes there's a bit more of a courtship involved. Sometimes, you get involved, you start to look into it and you kind of realize, maybe this isn't a great idea. And you go your separate ways or you recommend someone else, which is always a great way for the entire community to benefit as well, too.
And it may come back around to you
Exactly.
where that person recommends
it's
you.
the long game, always, with this industry.
So it sounds like what you're touching on is knowing your own wheelhouse. So you're saying know your own brand and what you're putting out there, and yours is know what you're good at and what you're going to excel at, so that you're not going to offer, hey, this book is going to sell super well, but I don't do romance. I shouldn't even offer that. So figure that out first.
Sure.
And you touched on what my next question is, which is, so how do you go and find projects to potentially produce? That's a lot of P's. Are you setting aside time in your day to, I'm going to spend an hour doing research? Is it a little more natural than that? How do you find? I'd
love to say that I'm disciplined enough to be like, I'm going to take an hour and just research the heck out of my next book, and not be like in between chapters and be like, look, what's that? Like I was saying, it's about just being connected and seeing what's happening on social media and seeing what people are writing, following up on those communities. Like I mentioned, there are all of these online communities of authors, and
Where?
being Facebook, so Twitter, all the typical ones. So it's if I'm going through Goodreads, and it often one thing links to the next in terms of even frankly the sort of, if you enjoy this book, you'll enjoy this book kind of thing is the thread that I've followed as well. But oftentimes it happens to be what I'm reading, and I'm looking to see hasn't been done, or if not, what might be possible there. And obviously at a certain tier, that's not going to be plausible, or they already do have someone in mind, or it's already been done. Right. But oftentimes it is just about, just kind of like keeping that sort of one ear to the ground in that respect, and always kind of having that be a possibility while you're going about whatever you're doing at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah.
In a way, you're sort of always on.
Right.
If you're at some sort of meet and greet, if you're at a physical event, that event is a beginning and an end. But I follow authors that I've worked with and authors that I read for pleasure on all different kinds of social media. And they will call out other people, or somebody will start following me on Twitter who I see is connected to an author I've worked with. And so then I might track back, figure out who that person is, and say, they're writing some stuff. Do I feel it's a good fit? If I don't feel it's a good fit for me, but I've done that thing where I've then taken that and sent that off as a lead to somebody else who I feel is a better fit. But it really, when we're running a business, and I don't get to say that I'm off duty at the end of 9 to 5. I'm still working. So if it's 7:30 at night, or if it's over the weekend, and something looks like a lead, if I don't follow it up, then that's a loss on my end.
Right. So it's similar to what Neil's saying, is just always having your antenna up, always having your ear to the ground, and just trying to be aware of like, this book is interesting. Is it an audio? Oh, it's not. Oh, okay, let me look into that. Which gets to my next question in terms of, so you find a potential project, wherever you might find it along your natural travels, and you think that thought to yourself, this book's not an audio, this might work for me, I think it might be good for me to produce. Aside from falling into your wheelhouse performance-wise or interest-wise, if it's going to be royalty share, or even if not, perhaps you want to do a little bit of work into, is this book worth my time to go after and try to produce? How do you figure that out? What kind of questions do you ask yourself? What resources are you using, probably online, to figure out, is this book worth the effort.
Okay, so before I make the initial contact with the author, you're asking. Okay, so the first thing I would think, is to behave like a fan of the author. Follow that author on social media, see how interactive they are, see if you can get a sense of who they voluntarily communicate with. If you can see if their social media is just push after push after push of the book that they've done, as opposed to them reaching out, then they don't really get the point that social media is a two-way street. That's a person who has bought into the idea that if I yell loud enough, people will buy the book, as opposed to if I connect with my audience, they will support me.
Right.
And it's that second thing that you're actually looking for. So I think each of us could do this best on a platform we understand the best. So it's not saying Twitter is better than Facebook is better than LinkedIn. It's whichever one works where your mind works. So that way you can go, okay, this person gets it, because you will understand that best if you're working in the social media that works for you.
Right.
And we've mentioned Goodreads a couple of times. It's really, really good to check out the Goodreads platform. And there's a lot of ways to do that, because authors who are really dedicated tend to actually have these long interactive discussions with fans there. Now, Goodreads gives away ebooks, not audiobooks, but you can really use that as a proxy when you're trying to evaluate. So you can get a sense of how someone's book is doing, where their Amazon sales ranking is without making a contact. And that's mostly, the ebook thing. But you can also sort of see how are they promoting that ebook? Are they doing things like BookBub or whatever with it, to see if they are investing in the success of their book? Somebody who isn't investing in the ebook is not likely to turn around and invest in the audiobook.
Interesting. And so, Neil, do you find that beyond the social media profiles, which I imagine you can have an author who's really motivated about their promotion, but it doesn't always turn into a high-selling book. Are there other ways beyond social media that you're trying to figure out if the book is selling well? Again, digging into the Amazon stats, or maybe
the Amazon stats are. It's certainly something to take into consideration. The Amazon selling that can be gamed a little bit, in terms of where it is, what number it is, and that responds to things like promotions and sales, which may or may not be an indication of how many titles are actually moving in a given month, which is, particularly if you're looking at a royalty share, that's your bottom line, and as Stephen mentioned, BookBub, that's a great place to look in terms of who's getting sales, because they have their own specific thing in terms of how they evaluate an author. If someone can be a great author and be selling and moving a lot of books, but BookBub isn't interested in them, that's going to affect your decision one way or the other. Doesn't mean you're not going to work with them, but it's in terms of you're piecing together all these things to know when you do eventually make contact. Again, if we're talking about research and not the pitch, it's just information. The more information you have about what looks like their sales, you're not going to actually really know how many sales until you actually ask them that.
That was going to be my next question. Is do you just ask them directly? I know some authors can be a little bit protective of that information.
You're not going to tweet that at them, but when you're once you've made contact and whatever it is, if it's through a fan site or through Goodreads or something like that, once you're at that phase of it. That's a question you're going to want to have. It's a conversation you're going to want to have. And if they're protective of that information, it kind of is an indication that they may not want to doing business with you. Again, that's mostly a concern if you're doing a royalty share and not a finished hour where they're meeting your rate, of course. But I think it's still good information to know. I get that at a certain level. If you're doing per finished hour, then that's what you're making, and that's good. But like I said, if you're running a business, that's certainly part of your consideration as well too, and it's part of the conversation. I think that kind of transparency is important in terms of the work that we do, in terms of all our upfront costs that have to be laid out, in terms of if we're outsourcing our engineering and editing or whatever else. Everything kind of has to be on the table to some respect and not sort of held close to the chest, in order for it to be that beneficial, ongoing, strong relationship.
Yeah, and I would like to add that anytime it's a royalty share, even if it's a project that's originated on ACX that I'm auditioning for, I go for those sales numbers and I ask them to differentiate between how many items they're moving in case the thing is on if it's marked temporarily free as an ebook.
Right, free or perma-free.
Right, exactly. I want to know what people are actually making a purchase on.
Right.
Because I need to figure out, based upon how doing a royalty share, how long is it going to take me to make back what I would have made if it was a per finished hour product.
Right.
And I'll only consider taking a project where I feel it's a fair chance that I would make my per finished hour rate within 1 year. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm not.
Right.
But the way I look at it is I'm deferring that payment, and I'd like to defer it for a year or less. And then if I've gambled well, then years 2, 3, and 4 become the reward for that gamble.
Right. That's all found money.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I really like that consideration that it's a deferred payment. I think that's important to have that in the conversation. That it's nothing is free here. You know, this is the deferred payment towards an investment that you're making in a co-business venture.
That I love that. That really makes a lot of sense, and I think it helps set up both sides as really invested in the project and both sides as business people who are trying to make something out of this production.
Well, and on both sides making an investment, I've also found that on royalty share jobs, both outside and internally, that bringing up to a rights holder that, you know, before they published the ebook, they had an editor who went through the book. They had beta readers. They did those kinds of things before it went live. So the idea that we need someone to proof the book and potentially edit and master the book, who's not my set of ears and not their set of ears.
Right.
Once you make that equation and then you say, you know, that person could be hired for this amount per finished hour.
Right.
I've gotten rights holders to understand that I'm already investing my time in something and I'm risking that. I would like them to make the investment of covering that component, as opposed to that being on me for that job, which is different than how I handle a per finished hour. And a per finished hour, I set my rate where it is.
And it is what it is.
And then I include that within that cost.
Right. And I think it also shows that you're invested in their project as well, because you're laying out this and you're hoping to get back that over the period of time that you mapped out.
Well, and talking about that aspect of the process in general, I think is crucial. We want to gain an understanding in terms of what the author is doing, and we want to give them an understanding of what it is that we do. I think it also makes the conversation a lot more about business and not about like what I need. You know, it's about like, here are all of the components here. I'm hiring a professional to do this work. I am a professional. You're a professional. We're all professionals here. Everyone here is a professional. And that, you know, makes the conversation, which, you know, it can be tough to talk about money with someone you don't really know, to be honest. You know, and particularly in the early perspective part of it. But if it's about clear, tangible things, it's a mutual education. And I always think that it's, regardless of, even if it doesn't work out, I think it's good to be educating the rights holder in terms of their end of the process, particularly if it's their first time around the block.
Right.
And so that they know that in the future, and they have that same expectation of other narrators.
And they may tell another author who then maybe is your next book, and then it all...
The more everyone knows about all of this information, which is why it's great that we're doing this, the more smooth, the whole process is just expanded, and there are more possibilities, and just it's a lot friendlier. So, you know, so it's good.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break for the great debate, where our presenters are tackling your burning questions about audiobook publishing.
Welcome to The Great Debate, where our panelists will argue the hottest topics of today's audiobook industry. On my left is Chris Ciulla, and on my right is Dara Rosenberg. Each panelist will have a chance to answer for each question, and I'll keep an eye on the clock to make sure nobody takes it too far. Our first topic is a doozy: royalty share versus per finished hour payment from the producer's perspective. Chris.
I think royalty share deals are great. It allows narrators to break into the industry and get credits underneath their belt. And then they also learn how to market along with the rights holder, and how to learn those marketing pathways so that when they get deeper into their career, they can make some money on bounties and royalties and make some cash.
Dara, how are you getting paid?
I like to know right away from the beginning that I'm going to get paid for my work. I think royalty shares may be great at the beginning. You learn how to do a book, and you can do short books. But if I'm going to spend a week on a book, I want to know I'm going to make money. I don't think I can gauge if a book's going to sell or not. I'm not that good at that.
Chris, are you that good at that?
Some people are that good at that. They can look at analytics and see how good a book is doing on the market, and then that would be, some books, it's the best choice to take it as a royalty share because it's going to sell like hotcakes. So you'll make the most money, way more than you would make as a PFH job on a royalty share job.
Dara, are you willing to get paid in hotcakes?
I'll get paid any way you want to pay me. That's cool.
Terrific. Today's topic 2, pseudonym versus real name. Go ahead, Dara, if that is in fact your real name.
I believe you have to do a pseudonym. I do not want my daughter looking me up in 10 years and hearing all the dirty things that I say all day long for work.
Chris, what about the dirty things you say all day long?
Problem with the pseudonym is people won't know that those are the books that you've done. So when you're starting out and people are grabbing that that Audible search engine and throwing your name in there, you want there to be 50, 60, 70 books under your name rather than 30 and say 30 under another name and 30 under another name. All your name.
Dara, how do you build up your roster of productions with a pseudonym?
I went very, very slow and I started doing everything under my name, and I get so many books there, and they actually choose that narrator over me sometimes in publishing casting. So you just build it up just like you're building yourself up, and you can get a following and you can get lots of romance books and talk any way you want all day long.
Moving on to our last topic for the day. Chapter upload at the end of the production versus chapter by chapter. Dara, give it to me all at once.
I give them that first 15 minutes. If they want to tell me they want it a different way, they see a different vision, I'll go with them. But then I put it all up at the end because I don't want to micromanage. I'll do my job and do it well.
Chris?
I like to upload chapter by chapter. The reason being, I like to bring the rights holder in and have them help with quality control. And it's their novel. Some of them believe like they should be directing us. And it's more about learning how to help, how to be a team, how to work together for the best possible book out there.
So Dara, you don't want to be a team?
Obviously not. So I am a team. We talk at length before the production. I know exactly what they want. I'll say, what do you want for this character? Do you have a certain sound that you want? And I will give them what they want, hopefully.
Let's wrap things up with the lightning round. These questions will be coming fast and furious, so I hope our panelists are ready. Best accent, Dara.
Southern.
Chris.
Russian.
Fiction or nonfiction, Dara.
Fiction.
Chris.
Non-fiction.
Morning record or night record, Chris.
Night.
Dara.
All day record.
Do you think I should get bangs, Dara?
Sure.
Chris.
Хорошо.
Bad Boys 1 or Bad Boys 2, Chris.
Bad Boys 1. Bad Boys.
Dara.
Neither. Haven't seen either of them.
What's wrong with Chris, Dara?
I'm gonna look so good at the end of this.
What you gonna do? What you gonna do?
What are you going to do when they come for you? Thanks for joining us on The Great Debate, where our panelists argue the hottest topics of the audiobook industry. We'll see you next time. Okay, so we've now, you're talking about making sure everybody understands everything, and once you're at the stage of talking to the author. Once you decide on a title that you'd like to produce and you are reaching out, you'd make that decision to reach out to the author. How are you reaching out to them? I think somebody mentioned a fan site. Do you do it publicly on a social media page? Do you take it to the private messages? Do you find an email address? All of the above? Like, how do you make that initial contact?
I think that depends upon the author.
Yeah.
I think if you've got somebody who's being very interactive with their fan base, I could easily imagine a tweet saying, hey, I make audiobooks. You don't seem to be in audiobooks. Let's talk. Mm-hmm. I think that can be appropriate with some authors who really do that back and forth thing, as opposed to, you can get the sense you're trying to judge somebody else's response at that point purely on what they put out on social media.
Right.
And they might have a mismatch there. They might project themselves as very boisterous, but so you may not be quite properly calibrated. But it really can be any one of those things, the private email that follows it up. But I try to make myself a presence in their social media before I reach out.
I see.
No matter what. So, I've been following you since this. That was a really interesting comment you made on that, which is not real. So the idea of if they're commenting on anything from politics to fuzzy animals, being able to bring up something that they've talked about on social media that you interacted with is like, okay, it's calibrating why they should know you.
Right. And it shows you as authentic and somebody that's spent your time living in their world and learning about them rather than just, oh, they got a book, I want to make it.
Well, that's also part of the reason why what I said earlier, sometimes I'll do a bit of research and realize this is a good prospect, but I'm not the right narrator.
Right.
And because we all talk. You've got to understand.
We all talk.
Right? Yeah, we do, and we sit there in that little box and we talk to a stick like this most of the day. But it means that when we get out, we tend to reach out to each other because we're the people who really understand what we're going through. Mm-hmm. And so, if something isn't right for me, but it's right for Neil or it's right for somebody else, and I know it's not right for me, why waste the research that I've done?
Right.
Right.
And so how do you find success reaching out? Like what methods are you taking?
I think, like Stephen was saying, it's varied. It depends on your feel for the author. Like I said before, if they're alive or if they are not, it's a different process. But you know, aside from the sort of getting to know you slowly through social media, it is possible, and it's, you know, to do an email, a direct email to someone, maybe once you're in their orbit, but like any other kind of email, it shouldn't be absolutely cold, you know, sort of fronting it with a referral, you know, which is the series that I'm working on now in this manner. The one author, Nathan Van Coops, referenced Brian Cohen. He said, oh, he's looking for someone to do his work. Would you, you know, you should reach out to him. Right. And so I fronted the email with like referral from, you know, from Nathan Van Coops. That's sort of like, and that's kind of, that's not particular to this business. That's true for any referral.
Right.
You don't want the email to be freezing.
Right.
But it's possible to do. And I mean, frankly, like, I know that these kind of deals have come out of people doing a complete out of the blue cold email. You know, maybe the relationship starts there and it develops from there as well. But I think, I don't know what the percentage of success is compared to, you know, some other way. So, you know, in addition to social media, making a direct, informed, you know, sensitive, non-intrusive, I'm not on your front doorstep kind of reach is perfectly acceptable if handled like a, you know, like a human. So.
And this sounds like it's getting into understanding the author, and I'm just curious if there's anything else sort of about the author's frame of mind, something you always kind of want to make sure you mention or stay away from when you're reaching out to authors. Have you ever found that there's anything that really helps your cause, or is very much just like, you know what, I tried that angle and that doesn't really work, it doesn't come off well?
I mean, I feel like you wouldn't be reaching out to that author in the first place if you didn't already connect to their material. And in many ways, having that be that it's not about wanting to do business. It's wanting to, I really want to read your book.
Right.
And
so does a compliment help? You know, I thought your book was great. Does it come off as cheesy?
I mean, you know, again,
is it the fan side or the business side or somewhere in the middle?
It's a delicate balance. Yeah? You know, I mean, I think you want to be clear that you're not there to just to blow smoke, but to create a relationship. And part of that, a big reason for that relationship is you really love their book and you really want to, you know, think that would be a great working relationship. Your voice is right for it, etc. So, you know, in terms of what not to do, I mean, in some ways, you know, being too aggressive in any way could scare someone off, you know, unless, you know, but that being said, enthusiasm is important, you know, and like I said, it's a delicate balance of all these things. And in many ways, it's kind of like any of the networking you do as an audiobook narrator. You want to work together as people, as a human being, again, before you're, you know, a production machine. So, you know, generating that as part of everything else that goes on is certainly recommended, and is, you know, it's part of it flavors the entire interaction from the get-go.
Do you ever find yourself auditioning before the project makes its way to ACX? Do you ever start off with an audition, record some of the book on your own, and just send it so they can hear your voice, or do you wait till you get to ACX and everything is sort of set up to go through that officially?
There are very definitely people who it's like, so let's say you've picked up the book, you've looked at the sample at least. Usually the sample being the first few pages if you're looking at the ebook. And it has a really strong opening, or an opening that you really feel that you can kill. You know, I could totally do this piece and do this piece solidly, and this will show them even if there's stuff that's later on in the book that they're going to think is important. The idea of taking a little bit of time, reading through the book, preparing that sample and sending that along, saying, I'm an audiobook narrator, you know, I'd like to do, I see this book isn't an audio, here's my sample, is a really strong way to do this. Because in order for you to have done that audition piece well, you've had to have done the kind of research we're talking about. Because if you haven't at least read the book, you know, if you're going to do that, you've got to have that good sense of who that author is on social media, so that way I could do this in a way that I think is really going to connect with you. Right. Because again, what I'm trying to overcome is the fact that you don't know me.
Right.
And you hearing 5 to 10 minutes of me doing your work, you know, listening to an audiobook is a very intimate experience.
Right.
And so if I'm looking for a way to really grab that situation, then absolutely investing that time up front is probably one of the strongest ways to do that.
And maybe not every time. I imagine there's a little bit of your time investment in preparing 5 or 10 minutes of audio. But do you feel that when you really want the project, that's a good way to try to seal the deal?
Yeah, I haven't done it as part of my initial contact, but I've certainly done it as part of the growing conversation that we've had before even agreeing to be working together.
Right.
Yeah, it's a time investment, but like anything else, it's an investment that could pay off. And particularly I've done it in terms of knowing or letting them know that my voice is right for the project. If it's YA or if it's something grittier or something like that, there's a different range that has to be approached there that may not be directly reflected on what they first look at if they look at my website or my Audible page or something like that. So I've done that. Partially in the sense to kind of arrive at that, am I the right fit for your book, or to make them comfortable about that.
Right.
But also, I mean, in a way, you're beginning the collaborative process.
Right.
And in that, I've gone back and forth a few times, even like, well, this character, I'd like to see this and maybe about that. Because we're not in production yet, I'm more than happy to do that. And in fact, I think it comes out of theater and things like that. That I think that collaboration is part of building that partnership.
Right.
But also, it's just makes everyone's work stronger to be working off each other's brains, of course. Once you get, I think it's important to say, though, even given all that, once you're moving into production, and this is also part of the conversation, is about being very clear, even with that collaboration that you've established, that once you move into production, there are very firm lines in terms of the work that I'm going to do and the work that I'm going to, the feedback I'm going to expect from you and my response to that.
Right.
I think it's, in these kind of situations, it's easy to get on the other side of the line because you're like you said, you're prospecting, so you're putting yourself out there a bit more, but you don't want to turn that into
don't give it all to to land the project. Don't
compromise your integrity as an artist and as a producer and as a narrator just to keep the work going. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. To expand on Neil's theater metaphor. Very rarely is the best playwright also the best director for the project.
Right.
And having the author realize that in this case they are the playwright, not the director, that can be a hard thing. It can be a very hard thing because realize they've lived with these characters for years up until now, assuming that it hasn't been done in other kinds of media. This is the first time you're asking them to let go of their baby.
Right.
And that's a really difficult place to be. So having that discussion early on, saying, let's have these creative things now. What do you need me to know about these characters before
Setting
I begin?
That expectation
right,
early.
but realizing that I'm a different artist than you and I'm going to take that information and I'm going to portray it as well as I can. It's probably not going to sound like what it sounds like in your head.
Right. But that's okay.
But that's okay. And that's the important thing. And I feel like that's one thing that playwrights get more comfortable with earlier on than novelists.
Well, they're used to workshopping, playwrights, and by and large, if they've come through any kind of system, they and that's
they're
not
used to being a little more collaborative.
If it's a brand new process for an author in this medium, then it's going to be different, and it's part of the education, I think.
Right. Whereas a playwright or a screenwriter, part of their process is letting go of that baby, then let somebody else do something with it. That's a much harder place for a novelist to be in if they're also the rights holder.
That makes sense. Yeah. Let's take a break from the action and check in on ACX's Andrew Gallagher and his QA corner.
Hi, I'm Andrew Gallagher. I'm the QA supervisor and production evangelist for ACX. Welcome to the QA corner, where we take a quick look at the little details you've got to get right before you consider your audiobook production complete. This corner will be taking a look at section headers and combined sections. A section header announces the section of the audiobook you're about to listen to. This can include an introduction, a prologue, epilogue, or any chapter. It could be as simple as Chapter 1, or it could hint at what's to come. For example, Chapter 1, Emil's Master Plan. There's 3 things I would say you should remember with section headers: consistency, precedent, and follow your manuscript, which I think is most important. For example, if the manuscript says Chapter 1 and then Chapter 2, you should follow it. You should also be consistent. If you announce some section headers and not others, the listener might think there's missing content. Every section of your audiobook must be a separate file. This includes opening credits, closing credits, introductions, prologues, epilogues, chapters, etc. There are exceptions to this. Due to our time and file size constraints, If any section is longer than 120 minutes or larger than 170 megabytes, you should split it up. I would suggest finding a good break within the section and splitting it there. You also have to have a section header on that second section. For example, if you're breaking up chapter 5, the first section, you can just say chapter 5. For the new section, the second section, you should say chapter 5, part 2. Thanks for watching. Tune in next time where we take a quick look at the little details you've got to get right before you consider your audiobook production complete.
So taking it to the ACX specific side of things, once you talk to the author about this and we get onto ACX, do you find, what's the level of hand-holding that is necessary? Or perhaps it's more just teaching? To what extent are you helping them understand the ACX process and signing up and putting up the book and all that?
Well, it's in one way, it's, we don't see their portal,
Right.
directly there, and there's discussion about this. So it's, there's and I will say, basically everything that I'm talking about here is stuff that I've learned from, obviously from other people, and as much as some degree of self-discovery. But there are resources for finding all these things out, particularly in terms of what's the, like, literally, how do they make you an offer? That's I've done that degree of like, well, you have to go to my profile and then you just make an offer, and that's how that works. And if it's not intuitive, or if there are there are resources on their sides of the equation as well too.
So just pointing them to those.
Yeah, and I think there's good practice things to be putting out there. Like, I always remind them when we're at the point where they're putting the they have to post it as what looks like an audition before we can generate the offer. To be clear, to say, this is a project that I'm working with Neil Hellegers on, they're supposed to put up some kind of sample, but even if they say that and they put up a sample of the script, someone is going to read it, whether I'm not, but just because I've done it, I've put it up there. I'm like, oh, this looks great. And I start to record it and I look back, I'm like, oh, this is not actually a possibility. So just that kind of thing, to make sure that no one else needs to waste their time on it, as well as the author needs to waste any time on it.
Some informal things have sort of grown up about how both narrators and rights holders utilize the system. One of them is what Neil just pointed out, putting in the description that you've already found a person for it, and putting that into the description, saying that it's Neil's or it's somebody else's, that you don't need to audition for this. That's one way that we're utilizing the system in a way it wasn't actually necessarily designed to do, because there isn't a way to just put the book up and not post it live for audition before it goes to somebody. And I know that can actually be a scary point for people. The idea that you have then shepherded this person all the way through the process, helped them get it all set up, got all the stuff together, and you are so worried they're going to post it and go live, and then suddenly they're going to be inundated with 74 auditions, and they're going to pick one of those instead of you.
You brought them to the dance, and they left with someone else.
Exactly, exactly. That's the fear.
Has that happened to you, where you've brought them to the site, the author, and explained it to them, and then they end up going with somebody else for the book? And how do you handle that?
Right. So
Cheers.
That particular thing hasn't happened to me, but again, there's forums on Facebook and other places where we talk, and that has happened to some other people. In the case of what I tend to do, though, is I tend to say to them, put it up for, people will do this if they're totally done, and you could put my name down in there, and to discourage people from sending auditions. In the forums, people were reporting where they had done all of that, and still somebody auditioned, and then somebody else was chosen.
Really?
So what I like to point out there is, well, is that the sort of person you would have wanted to work with in the long term anyway? Right. If you can't trust them, if you didn't build that level of trust before we got here, are you going to want to spend part of your time, since now you are a 50% owner who's earning from this particular thing moving forward for the next 7 years? What kind of a collaborator are they going to be if they're going to do that? It's hard, but it really has got to be about you're as helpful as you can, and you're upfront as you can be, but you have to let go. You can't control the whole situation, unfortunately.
And on a mechanical level, it is possible to really sort of be, either on the phone or online with each other and be like, okay, you put it up, boom, boom. I mean, the whole thing can fly through the system really quickly, which I think, I mean, it speaks to trust, of course, and things like that too. But I think it's being together on that stage of the process just makes it smoother.
So while deciding what books that might work for you to try to voice and bring to ACX, how do you determine if an author is or isn't investing in their book? What are some of the things that you might find on a Goodreads or as part of their social media that show you that they are or are not doing it right?
Okay, so simple, straightforward thing is cover art. A book is judged by its cover.
Always.
An audiobook by both its cover and its sample. And so if the cover art looks generic, or if the cover art looks as if it came from, a discount site, then that's a really good thing up front to point out whether there's an investment going on there. Does it seem like all of the content that is coming out on social media is being blasted out? How much interaction is there? It's not how many times a day they tweet, it's how many times a day they react to other people tweeting at them, or how many times they reach out and like and interact. Anyone can get one of these programs where they just sort of have a whole bunch of tweets and posts queued up and have them automatically go out. And that is very simple to do, and it's not high value. What you're looking for is somebody who actually has interaction with their audience, because somebody who has interaction with their audience can say something like, this book that you've been reading and these characters that you've been loving are about to get a voice, and then they can actually help enliven that audience for the fact that the audiobook is coming.
Right.
And then you and that author can do things like, release little bits along the way, even while show them how the sausage is made,
Right.
show them behind the scenes to help really build that audience up and make that happen. So those are the kinds of things you're looking for, things that don't feel automated and feel like there's real interaction going on.
Right.
You're looking for real if you're seeing typos in the book,
Right.
a lot of them, I mean, anything's going to get through.
Right.
I can't, I can think of many a professionally done book from, where you see an occasional typo. But if you're seeing lots of them, even
Carelessness.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, then that means that there wasn't an investment in editing beforehand.
Right. Right. Any big red flags or checkered flags, or would they be green flags on your end, Neil?
I don't follow NASCAR all that much, but I think what you're saying is that everything that Stephen was saying in terms of the quality of interaction, the cover, yeah, it is actually a thing. I guess the only thing I would add to that is when you reach out to them, you can tell a lot from that initial comeback. In terms of if it's something that they had been thinking of but hadn't made that step, or if it's something that they were already in the process of talking about. We're kind of reaching that point where more people are looking to make audiobooks than not. That's sort of changed in terms of it. Like, I never even thought about that.
Right.
That's always kind of, I wouldn't call it a red flag coming back, because you could be that person to hand them a flag. I don't know if that metaphor works exactly, but
just go with it.
Yeah, sure. In terms of here's how this flag waves, and that could be that could evolve them into the next phase. Brusqueness is obviously a turnoff, but it happens, and you may not proceed past that, or be like, no, I'm fine, thanks, or I got this figured, thanks, and okay, great. And then you don't necessarily want to continue that working relationship anyway. So,
Right.
Yeah.
On that same topic, if you reach out and things don't proceed the way you're looking for, maybe you do see a red flag somewhere, or you get a no thank you, or you send them your audition and they don't like your voice. Is that ever a learning experience? Has that ever happened to you, where you try to prospect, you reach out, it just doesn't go the way you thought it would? And is there anything you might have done differently or learned from it?
Yeah, I mean, I can and have driven myself crazy thinking about what could I have done differently to land this, but it is par for the course, and I always take it in that, that whether the time I would have spent on that is time that now opened up for something else that's going to be great and expansive. It is the thing. It's the very well trod idea that if you're working as an actor, 9 times out of 10 you're not getting the gig, and that's just part of the reality of the situation. I have a mechanism in my brain that actually just erases that entire prospect from existence, and unless it comes back to me, I'm like, what was that? Oh, right.
Right.
You just kind of move on, and you look at it as a learning opportunity in terms of, well, I could have approached this better, but may not be on you.
Right.
It may honestly be the person doesn't necessarily think you're the right voice for that, and that's okay.
Ever a time where you learned something from a project that didn't pan out?
Yeah, we kind of touched on it lightly before. The being too forward in the initial interaction, misjudging the social media presence, because sometimes somebody could really try to make themselves really seem out there, and then you figure, okay, so this is a person who I can have that big interaction with and make the splash here. And I've had the situation where it was politely sent back to me in a private email saying,
No thanks.
Yeah, exactly. And where,
Lay off, Stephen.
Yeah, where the tone of that email really made me believe that had I sent dear Mr. So and so, and I had done the formal thing, and I had given them the sample to listen to
Used
privately.
a colon after the initial
Well, but you-
statement.
you know,
Business letter.
Very business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do the whole business letter
Yeah.
thing, and then here's the 5-minute sample. I think in that particular case, I would have gotten a better response, and that was sort of misjudging the public persona.
And is there? It sounds like that you might just need to institute Neil's dump it out feature in the back of his head. I don't know that is there something you can learn from that, or is it just to maybe fine tune just a little bit each time the judgment that you get of the author's personality and how to approach them?
Well, and that's it. So it's like, I'm not Neil, and each one of us, if we try to do that same thing, we're going to approach it slightly differently. So I think it's the iterative thing you were just bringing us back to. It's the fact that each time I do it, I'm going to have some of my experiences, both positive and negative, in order to refine it moving forward. So the idea of my 150th time doing this, I'm going to be better at it than my 14th time.
Right.
So it's don't get discouraged when you don't get the first few of them. Keep doing it, because no matter how many books are there on the ACX platform, they're all not there.
Right.
And
There's new books getting written every day.
absolutely. And so thinking of ACX as your personal way of producing audiobooks, as opposed to just thinking of it as an audiobook an audiobook audition pay-to-play site sort of a thing.
Not pay to play.
Not pay to
No
play,
pay to
right.
play.
No pay. Exactly. So, as opposed to thinking of it, the auditions are here, thinking of it as, no, ACX is this tool
Right.
where I can have this discussion with you as a rights holder and say, oh, don't worry. All the contracts are there. All the distribution agreement stuff is there. The sales dashboard is there. It's all built in. It's all backed by, look at all the different books that have gone through this system already. You and I can have the artistic conversation, leave the business worry, all that.
Right. The contracts and the distribution. And all
Exactly.
that.
Leave all that to the system that's been already built for it.
Right. And I think that's a great note to end on, just the iteration and the constant improvement, and always hoping that the next time you do it, you'll be a little bit better at it, a little bit more likely to land the book because you've learned from the previous time.
Such is life.
Yeah, such is life. Well, thanks very much for joining us for today's episode of ACX University. I'd like to thank Neil and Stephen for sharing their knowledge about project prospecting, and I wish you the best of luck should you try to go out and do this yourself. We'll see you next time.